Can you add more to that distinction of the warrior class versus the highly credentialed general class? One of the reasons you made the video you did at the time, and I want to play that video here, this is cut 23, when you were relieved of your post, is that you did not feel as if we were a mighty fighting force up against the enemies that wish to kill us. Play cut 23.
We have a Secretary of Defense that testified to Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Force could withstand the Taliban advance. We have chairmen of Joint Chief, who the Commandant is a member of that, who's supposed to advise on military policy. We have a Marine combatant commander. All of these people are supposed to advise, and I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone? Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up? And from my position, potentially all those people did die in vain if we don't have senior leaders that own up and raise their hand and say, we did not do this well in the end.
What happened after you made that video?
It got real weird, Charlie. After I made that video, I was fired the next day immediately. You know, I knew that I was risking my career. If you watch that video in its entirety, like, I call the shot. I say, I know I'm risking my career, my retirement, my family stability. It did end up losing really all three of those things. But there should have been an investigation that took place. But like I told you, I was shot right into the political realm. The cardinal sin in the military is making your bosses look bad. And so I was fired immediately. And I was told at that time that if I just shut my mouth, that the generals would take care of me. So the best case scenario, I would be hidden in a cubicle and make PowerPoints for some general officer for the next 3 years, limping towards my retirement. And I just knew I couldn't live my life that way, number one. And number two, I fully believed all those comments I made, and no one was addressing the content of my statements. And that's what really deeply bothered me. So it became this fight, you know, and I continued to fight all the way to the end.
So if Pete Hegseth is to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense, what can he do from a policy perspective to better prepare the American military to fight our enemies?
Yep. So Matthew Lohmeyer, there's a lot of people out there advocating to get rid of woke generals, and I think there's a lot of generals that need to get cleaned out. Historical precedents for it. George Marshall after World War I is probably the best example. That being said, just going after wokeism is actually attacking the symptom, not the root cause. The root cause is that you have general officers that it takes 40 years to make a 4-star general. Every evaluation for an officer in the military is a subjective evaluation, i.e., I'm trying to please my boss and get a higher evaluation than my 4 peers. And so the people that are 4-star generals have literally pleased their boss for 40 years more so than all of their peers that are competing for the same jobs. And I'll tell you what, it should be based on the best performers, but pleasing your boss and being the best performer diverge at certain places in your career. Anyone that's worked in a bureaucracy understands this. And so the reason why wokeism is so prevalent, one, because some of the moves that President Obama made, but two, more importantly, the general officers are so fickle, they care most about self-advancement, and they'll do whatever is the topic du jour, and they have no backbone. I mean, when Carter Ham was in Germany and Benghazi took place, and he was watching on screens Americans fighting 1v1,000, and he had 8 military options, and he was told to stand down, and he did. Why? Because he's conditioned to please his boss, and that's what all general officers do. I think what Pete Hegseth needs to do is he needs to get into the military. He needs to clean out a lot of the archaic leadership, but then he needs to implement a performance-based system. Because at the end of the day, if you've got the best performer, if I as an infantry officer go against another infantry officer and the best one wins, and whatever that competition is, then all other things go away, because the focus of the military should always be on lethality and winning.
Yeah, just a minute remaining. I want to keep you for another segment. And so how did we get away from lethality, winning, destroying the enemy? What specifically, what year, what period of time did that start to change?
You can look back to the last generation that won a war. It was World War II, and we didn't have the national security establishment then. World War II is when we literally built the national security establishment that we have today. It went through the National Security Act of 44, 47, 50, and then it finally what structured what we have now is the Goldwater-Nichols Act after Vietnam. Where we really went off the rails was Vietnam. I mean, Korea was still a generation of World War II vets, and the the rigid structure of the current DoD was not in place yet. What happened was we created this military-industrial complex. We created this system of officers that are self-pleasing. And in Vietnam, what we did after our loss, instead of going back and holding the general officers accountable, we let the general officers sing the song that it was the draft and the drugs and it was the junior service member. And what we really did was we empowered these general officers that failed. I mean, if you go look at someone like Khe Sanh, where we lost hundreds of thousands of lives, and then it was strategically important one year and then not the next year. I mean, these are huge failures that no general officers were held accountable. The massacre in Vietnam, My Lai massacre, if you look at that, only company-grade officers were held accountable, no general officers. So somewhere along the way, starting with Vietnam, stopped holding general officers accountable, and we need to get back to that. And I think this is such a breath of fresh air when we're talking about President Trump and Pete Hegseth.